The sound of the dinner tray crashing against the marble floor silenced the entire restaurant. But the kick was louder. Richard didn't just step over the woman on the floor. He kicked the silver serving tray, sending roasted duck and crushed potatoes sliding across the white marble, because a drop of Bordeaux had splashed onto his Ferragamo Oxfords. He didn't care that she was on her knees gathering broken crystal. He didn't care that wine was soaking through her black uniform. He only cared that she was in his way. But then he looked closer. "Maggie." He laughed, his voice cutting through the shocked silence loud enough for the entire dining room to hear. He turned to his fiancée, pointing a finger at the woman on the floor. "Babe, look. This is the waitress I wasted 2 years on. 6 years later, and look at you. You're still serving people like me." The maitre d' watched the whole thing. But instead of helping Maggie up, he looked at Richard's tailored Tom Ford suit, then at Maggie's wine-stained uniform, and he made his choice. "Ma'am," the maitre d' said, his voice cold, "you need to leave. You're causing a disturbance." Richard walked back to his table laughing, thinking he was untouchable. He didn't see Maggie's face change. He didn't see the tears stop instantly. And he definitely didn't see her pull out a sleek black phone. No case, no scratches, the kind with a titanium frame that doesn't exist in normal stores, and whisper 3 words that would end his life as he knew it. "Henry, I need you." Who was on the other end of that call? Maggie walked toward the restaurant exit. Her hands didn't shake. Her face showed nothing. Behind her, Richard and his fiancée returned to their table, the one by the floor-to-ceiling windows with the view of Central Park in candlelight that cost $500 per setting. Maggie stopped walking. She stood near the coat check, perfectly still, watching them through the dining room. Richard raised his champagne glass. The sommelier rushed over, all deference and careful pours. His fiancée squealed, holding up her left hand, so the ring caught the light like she was performing for invisible cameras. Maggie's voice came quiet, detached, like she was reading from a script she'd memorized years ago. "Richard proposed to me 6 years ago. In this restaurant. Table 12 by the window." The memory flickered. Young Maggie, younger Richard. He was holding a ring box. She was crying happy tears, hands over her mouth. The waiter had brought complimentary champagne, smiling at the scene. He took the ring back 4 days later. Said his investors wouldn't respect him if he married someone who turned down Harvard for him. Someone who became expendable. Inside the dining room now, Richard held up his phone to show his business associates something. They leaned in, nodding. His fiancée grabbed his arm, laughing at whatever was on the screen. Maggie's phone buzzed in her hand. The text, 10 minutes. "Don't move." She didn't move. Richard stood from the table, shaking hands with his associates. He was mid-laugh, telling them something, when he saw Maggie standing there near the entrance. His face darkened instantly. "Are you following me?" He walked straight toward her, each step deliberate. His fiancée clutched his arm, eyes wide. "Babe, is she stalking you?" The maitre d' from earlier appeared. He had the general manager now. The manager's hand rested on his tablet like a weapon. "Ma'am, I told you to leave. I'm calling security." Maggie didn't move, didn't speak, just looked at Richard. Richard stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne. The same brand from 6 years ago. "You know what your problem is? You never knew your place. You thought you could stand next to me." He gestured at himself, then at her. "Look at you now. Still cleaning up other people's messes." His fiancée raised her phone. "This is going on my story. #CrazyX. Maggie's phone buzzed again. 5 minutes. Richard grabbed Maggie's small purse from her hands, the worn leather one she'd been clutching when she fell, the one with the broken zipper and frayed strap. He walked 3 steps to a service station, dropped it onto a dirty dish cart. "Hello everyone, before we continue today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never get to miss our channel new stories. It is quick, free, and best way to support us in bringing more interesting stories. Your support means the world to us and motivate us to create more good stories. Tell us where you are watching from, your country, city, so we can know how far our stories goes. Thank you. Let's begin the story. The sound of the dinner tray crashing against the marble floor silenced the entire restaurant. But the kick was louder. Richard didn't just step over the woman on the floor. He kicked the silver serving tray, sending roasted duck and crushed potatoes sliding across the white marble, because a drop of Bordeaux had splashed onto his Ferragamo Oxfords. He didn't care that she was on her knees gathering broken crystal. He didn't care that wine was soaking through her dress. He only cared that she was in his way. But then he looked closer. Maggie. 10 minutes earlier, she'd been sitting alone at a corner table, tablet propped against her water glass, completely absorbed in something on the screen. She hadn't noticed Richard enter with his entourage. 3 business associates in matching navy suits, and Brittany, his fiancée, who wore her engagement ring like a weapon she couldn't wait to deploy. Richard had noticed her, though. He'd frozen mid-step, then smiled that smile Maggie remembered from 6 years ago, the one that meant someone was about to get hurt. He'd crossed the dining room with purpose, his group trailing behind like sharks sensing blood. Maggie Smith. My God, is that really you? His voice had been loud enough to turn heads at nearby tables. What are you doing in a place like this? Maggie had looked up slowly, her face carefully neutral. Richard. Hello. This is incredible. He'd gestured to his associates. Gentlemen, Brittany, you have to meet someone. This is Maggie, the girl I dated in my startup days. Before I understood the importance of strategic partnerships. He'd said it like a joke, but his eyes were cold. Maggie had set down her fork. It was good seeing you, Richard. Enjoy your dinner. She'd started to gather her things, moving with quiet efficiency. But Richard had stepped closer, his hip bumping her table just hard enough to make the wine glass teeter. Red liquid sloshed over the rim. Leaving so soon? Come on, don't be like that. I'm just surprised they let you in here. This place has a dress code. His gaze had traveled over her simple black dress with obvious disdain. Excuse me. Maggie had stood, reaching for her purse. That's when Richard had moved to block her path. His business associates had formed a loose semicircle, trapping her against the table. Brittany had already pulled out her phone, angling for the best shot. You know what? I never properly thanked you, Maggie. Richard's voice had carried across the restaurant. For being such a good sport back then. For turning down Harvard to help with my little company. For working those double shifts at the coffee shop. He'd paused for effect. I mean, it didn't work out, obviously. You weren't exactly wife material. But you tried so hard. Maggie had attempted to step around him. Richard had grabbed the serving tray from a passing waiter's station and thrust it into her hands. Here. Since you're so good at serving people. She'd taken it reflexively, confusion flickering across her face. That's when Richard had kicked it, hard, sending food and wine and crystal exploding across the white marble floor. The crash had been deafening. Oops, Richard had said, his voice dripping with false concern. Look at the mess. Someone should clean that up. Now, as Maggie knelt among the broken glass and scattered food, Richard turned to his audience with theatrical flair. Everyone meet the charity case who thought she could marry up. 6 years later, and she's still right where she belongs. Brittany circled Maggie with her phone, narrating for her Instagram story. Oh my God, babe, is this really her? The one you told me about. This is insane. The maitre d' had appeared, his expression thunderous. But his anger wasn't directed at Richard. His gaze had moved between Richard's Tom Ford suit and Maggie's wine-stained dress, performing an economic calculation that took less than 3 seconds. Ma'am, you need to leave immediately. You're disturbing our other guests. Richard's business associates had laughed, already pulling out their phones. This was content. This was a story they'd tell at the club. I didn't, Maggie had started. Security will escort you out if necessary. The maitre d' had crossed his arms, his decision final. Maggie had risen slowly from the floor. Her hands were steady as she pulled out a sleek black phone. No case, titanium frame, the kind that didn't exist in normal stores. She'd pressed one contact, held the phone to her ear, and spoken 3 words that cut through the dining room's resumed chatter like a blade. Henry, I need you. She'd walked toward the exit without looking back. Richard had returned to his table triumphant, already recounting the story to his associates with embellishments. Brittany had been uploading the video, adding hashtags. The restaurant had returned to normal, the incident already becoming dinner party gossip. Maggie had stood outside on the sidewalk, her ruined dress clinging to her skin in the October chill. She hadn't cried, hadn't moved, just waited. 3 minutes later, Michel Rousseau, the restaurant owner, had burst through the front doors, his face drained of color. He'd stopped when he saw her, his hands moving helplessly. Mrs. Peters. His accent had thickened with panic. Mon Dieu, I had no idea you were dining with us tonight. Please, there has been a terrible mistake. A catastrophic mistake. Inside, Richard had been holding court, demonstrating the kick for his associates when his business partner's phone had started ringing. Then another phone. Then all of them, a cascade of urgent calls that killed the laughter instantly. His partner had answered, listened for 10 seconds, and gone gray. Richard, what did you just do? What do you mean? I just ran into my ex and... That was Marcus Chin, our lead investor. His partner's voice had been barely above a whisper. He wants to know why you just assaulted Henry Peters' wife on camera. In public. With witnesses. Richard's smile had frozen, then cracked. Henry Peters? The Henry Peters? That's impossible. That was Maggie Smith. She worked at a coffee shop. But his partner wasn't listening anymore. None of them were. They were all staring at their phones, at the same photograph that had just appeared in their news alerts. Maggie Smith at a Metropolitan Museum gala, wearing a gown that cost more than Richard's car, her hand resting on the arm of Henry Peters, the man whose investment firm could end careers with a single phone call. Outside, Michel Rousseau had been begging. Please, Mrs. Peters, come back inside. I have our private dining room available. I'll personally prepare anything you wish. And Mr. Wood and his party, they will be removed immediately. With my sincerest apologies. Maggie had looked past him, through the restaurant's windows, and watched Richard's world begin to crumble. No, she'd said quietly. I don't think I will. The black Mercedes S-Class arrived without fanfare, pulling to the curb with the quiet precision of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Henry Peters stepped out, mid-40s, simple charcoal suit, no jewelry except a plain wedding band. He moved like someone who'd never had to raise his voice to be heard. Inside, Richard was halfway to the door, his business associates flanking him like a protective detail that had already failed. He saw Henry enter and froze, recognition and fear warring across his face. Henry walked past him without a glance. Michel, the footage, please. The restaurant owner had the security tablet ready, hands trembling slightly as he pulled up the recording. Henry watched in silence, Richard kicking the tray, Maggie falling among shattered crystal, the crowd's laughter, Brittany's phone raised like a trophy. The only sign of Henry's reaction was the gradual tightening of his jaw, a muscle pulsing beneath his skin. When the video ended, Henry turned. His voice was conversational, almost gentle. You put your hands on my wife. Richard's rehearsed explanations died in his throat. Mr. Peters, there's been a misunderstanding. I didn't know she was. You kicked a tray into her. In public. On camera. Henry pulled out his phone with unhurried precision. 2 calls. Each conversation lasted less than 10 seconds. Richard's phone erupted. Not a single ring, but a cascade, buzzing, chiming, vibrating against his chest pocket like something trying to escape. He pulled it out with shaking hands. The screen was a waterfall of notifications. Marcus Chin, Goldman Capital, his board chairman, the bank, his creditors, all calling simultaneously, a digital avalanche that meant only one thing. His business partner had already stepped away, phone pressed to his ear, his face ashen. Brittany stood frozen, her Instagram story still playing on her screen, the last post she'd ever make from Richard's side. Henry pocketed his phone and finally looked at Richard directly. Now we talk. Maggie stood outside the restaurant, the October wind cutting through her ruined dress. Henry emerged, his suit jacket already off, draping it over her shoulders without a word. She leaned into him, and the story came quietly, meant only for him but loud enough that Michel, still hovering anxiously nearby, could hear every word. 6 years ago, I had a full scholarship to Harvard Business School. Her voice was steady, clinical, like she was recounting someone else's life. Richard convinced me to defer. Said we should build something together first, that the timing was perfect for his startup. He needed capital. I had tuition money saved. Henry's hand tightened on her shoulder. I worked double shifts at 2 restaurants to cover our rent while he networked. 60-hour weeks. I came home smelling like fryer grease while he practiced his pitch deck in our apartment. She paused, watching the restaurant's glowing windows. When his company got its first major investor, he told them he was the sole founder. Rewrote the incorporation papers. At the celebration dinner, he introduced me as his girlfriend who helped out sometimes. Maggie. He broke up with me the next week. Said his investors wouldn't take him seriously with a waitress girlfriend. Then he called Harvard, told them I was mentally unstable and had fabricated my credentials. Contacted every reference I had, told them I'd stolen company documents. Her laugh was bitter. I couldn't get a job answering phones. Lived in a studio with 3 roommates. Started writing restaurant reviews and hospitality analysis on a free blog at midnight after my shifts. Henry had found that blog 3 years ago at a hospitality tech conference. Her pitch deck for transforming service industry training had been brilliant, raw, furious, and undeniable. He'd invested in her consulting firm immediately. 6 months later, he'd realized he was investing in more than just her business. "He took everything," Maggie said softly. "And I built it back anyway." Inside the restaurant, Richard's phone had finally gone silent. Not because the calls stopped coming, but because the battery had died under the relentless assault. He sat alone at table 12, the one by the window where he'd proposed to Maggie 6 years ago, and watched his life dismantle itself in real time. The first email had arrived at 8:47 p.m. Marcus Chun, lead investor. "Effective immediately, Goldman Capital is exercising our redemption rights and withdrawing all funding from your venture. Recent events have created unacceptable reputational and fiduciary risk." By 8:52, 2 more investors had sent identical notices. The phrases were professionally bland: character concerns, misalignment of values, duty to our limited partners, but the message was clear. $60 million in funding gone. Richard's business partner had left without saying goodbye, his own phone pressed to his ear as he tried to explain to his wife why their name was about to be attached to a viral video of public assault. At 9:03, Richard's bank called. The commercial real estate loan, the one he'd personally guaranteed to buy his office building, was being called due. Immediately. Full balance. $4.2 million. He had 30 days. His line of credit notification came via text at 9:15. Frozen pending investigation. The luxury car lease termination arrived at 9:18. The Range Rover he'd parked in the restaurant's valet circle would be repossessed within 48 hours. But the courier who entered at 9:24 carried something worse than financial ruin. The cease and desist letter was 30 pages long, dense with legal terminology and footnoted evidence. Maggie's attorneys had receipts, the original business thesis she'd written during her Harvard application process, the one she'd shown Richard when they were together. His company's founding strategy document, filed 6 months later. The overlap was undeniable. Whole sections lifted verbatim, just enough words changed to avoid obvious plagiarism. The letter's final paragraph was succinct: make full restitution for stolen intellectual property and issue a public apology, or face fraud charges and civil litigation that would take everything he had left. Across the table, Brittany had been scrolling through Twitter with increasing horror. The video she'd posted, "Crazy Ex Alert, watch my fiancé put this stalker in her place," had been retweeted 14,000 times. But the comments weren't what she'd expected. "That's Henry Peters' wife. He just assaulted a billionaire on camera. Her consulting firm is worth more than his entire company. Someone's about to learn about consequences." Brittany had quietly slipped the engagement ring off her finger, set it on the table between them like a period at the end of a sentence, and walked out without looking back. Richard sat in the silence she left behind, his reflection ghostly in the dark window. Outside, he could see Henry and Maggie standing together on the sidewalk, her head resting against his shoulder. They looked like any couple on a Tuesday night, not the architects of his destruction. His phone, plugged into a waiter's charger, buzzed back to life. 73 missed calls, 89 unread messages, and 1 new email from his company's board of directors, subject line: emergency meeting, your immediate resignation required. The private dining room was smaller than Richard expected, intimate in a way that felt like a trap. The lawyer who entered at 9:47 p.m. was a woman in her 50s, carrying a single leather portfolio, and the kind of calm that came from never having lost. "Mr. Wood, I'm Patricia Chun, senior partner at Hastings & Lowell. I represent Mrs. Peters." She sat across from him without waiting for an invitation, extracting documents with practiced efficiency. "We need to discuss your options." Richard's voice came out hoarse. "Options?" "2 specifically." Patricia slid a document across the table. "Option A, you fight everything. The intellectual property theft, the fraud charges, the defamation lawsuit. We go to court. Discovery becomes public. Every investor report you've ever filed gets examined. Every employee you've ever mistreated gets deposed. The process takes 3 years, costs you everything you have left, and ends with criminal charges that blacklist you from every business community in America." She let that settle, then placed a second document beside the first. "Option B, you accept responsibility. Publicly. A formal confession and apology, delivered outside this restaurant tomorrow at noon with press present. You pay Mrs. Peters $500,000 in restitution for stolen intellectual property. You donate $250,000 to organizations supporting women entrepreneurs. You resign from your company effective immediately. And you accept a 5-year probation period. Any repeat behavior, any hint of retaliation, triggers immediate criminal prosecution with no plea bargaining available. Richard stared at the papers like they were written in a language he'd forgotten how to read. 500,000? I don't have that. You just froze my accounts. You have equity. A Tesla. A vacation property in Aspen your fiancé doesn't know about. Patricia's expression didn't change. You'll liquidate everything. Mrs. Peters doesn't need your money, Mr. Wood. She needs the public record corrected. She reached into her portfolio and extracted a thumb drive, setting it beside the documents with deliberate care. This contains tonight's footage from 4 camera angles. It also contains 3 years of documentation we've been compiling, emails from former employees describing your pattern of harassment and credit theft, investor reports with fabricated revenue numbers, text messages to business partners bragging about pushing people out of deals, NDAs you pressured junior staff to sign. We have 16 witnesses ready to testify. Richard's hand trembled as he reached for the thumb drive, then pulled back. 24 hours, Patricia said, standing. After that, we file everything and let the courts decide. My client prefers option B. She believes in accountability over vengeance. But she'll accept either outcome. She collected her portfolio. One more thing. The restaurant's security footage from 6 years ago? When you proposed to Mrs. Peters here, then returned 3 days later to take the ring back and tell her she wasn't good enough. We have that too. It was rather poetic finding it. She paused at the door. Midnight tomorrow, Mr. Wood. Choose wisely. The door closed with a soft click, leaving Richard alone with 2 documents, a thumb drive full of his own sins, and 24 hours to decide which version of destroyed he preferred to be. Richard stood on the sidewalk outside Rousseau's at exactly noon, flanked by cameras he'd been required to personally invite. The October sun was too bright, exposing every bead of sweat on his forehead, every tremor in his hands as he unfolded the prepared statement Patricia Chen's firm had provided. 14 news outlets had responded to his publicist's email. They'd come expecting a scandal, and Richard was about to give them exactly that. He cleared his throat. The microphones leaned closer like hungry mouths. 6 years ago, his voice cracked. He started again. 6 years ago, I stole the intellectual work of my then-girlfriend, Maggie Smith. She had been accepted to Harvard Business School with a full scholarship. Her thesis on transforming hospitality industry training through integrated technology platforms became the foundation of my company's entire business model. I took sole credit. I removed her name from all documents. I told investors I was the sole founder. A reporter started to interrupt. Patricia, standing just outside the camera frame, made a subtle gesture. Richard continued. When Ms. Smith tried to pursue her own career, I actively destroyed her opportunities. I contacted Harvard and made false claims about her character. I reached out to her professional references and discredited her. I did this deliberately to prevent her from exposing my theft. His hands shook so badly the paper rattled. Last night, I encountered Ms. Smith, now Mrs. Peters, at this restaurant. I physically assaulted her by kicking a serving tray into her, causing her to fall. I publicly humiliated her. I did this because seeing her success she built despite everything I took from her, reminded me of my own fraud. The reporters were silent now, cameras rolling, capturing every word. I am making this statement as part of a settlement agreement to avoid criminal prosecution. I am resigning from my company. I am paying full restitution. And I am accepting that my actions have consequences. He folded the paper, his face gray. I have no excuse. I stole from someone who trusted me, and I've spent 6 years lying about it. That's who I am. That's what I did. The questions came like a barrage. Did you know who she'd married? How much are you paying? Will you face charges? But Patricia was already guiding him toward a waiting car, her expression professionally neutral. By 6 p.m., the video had been viewed 4 million times. By morning, Richard Wood wasn't a rising entrepreneur anymore. He was a cautionary tale, a meme, a headline that would follow him forever. Tech founder admits to stealing ex-girlfriend's thesis, assaulting her in public. His Wikipedia page was updated within the hour. The first line no longer mentioned his company. It mentioned the theft. Their penthouse apartment overlooked Central Park, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city lights like a constellation brought to Earth. Maggie sat curled on the sofa, her laptop balanced on her knees, watching Richard's confession play for the 7th time. The view count kept climbing in the corner of the screen. Henry emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 mugs of tea, setting one beside her before sitting close enough that their shoulders touched. He didn't speak, just waited. "Is this who I am now?" Maggie's voice was barely audible over the city, sounds filtering through the glass. "Someone who destroys people. You didn't destroy him." Henry's response was immediate, gentle. "You held him accountable. There's a difference." Maggie clicked to another tab, Twitter, where Richard's name was trending 3rd nationally. The comments ranged from supportive to vicious, people she'd never met dissecting a man's life with surgical precision. "He'll never recover from this. He shouldn't." Henry took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "But you gave him a chance to make it right. You could have sent him to prison, dragged him through years of litigation, made sure he lost everything including his freedom. You chose accountability over vengeance. You chose restitution over ruin. That's mercy, Maggie." She stared at the screen a moment longer, Richard's face frozen mid-confession, his expression somewhere between shame and relief, then closed the laptop with quiet finality. "I don't want to think about Richard Wood anymore. I don't want him to take up any more space in my life. Not another minute. Not another thought." Henry set his tea down and pulled her closer. "Then don't give him that power." Maggie leaned into him, feeling the 6-year weight finally lifting from her shoulders. Outside, the city continued its endless motion, indifferent to one man's fall and one woman's choice to finally, mercifully let go. For months later, Rousseau's had a different name, the second table, and a different philosophy. 20% of profits went directly to staff equity. The servers weren't just employees, they were stakeholders. Maggie stood at the podium in a midnight blue gown, addressing 200 guests who'd paid $1,000 a plate for the second chances, supporting Women Entrepreneurs Gala. Her keynote had been personal, unflinching, and when she finished, the applause lasted a full minute. Dinner service began with quiet elegance. Until it didn't. The crash of crystal shattering cut through the string quartet's Vivaldi. A young server, Maria, barely 22, stood frozen as red wine cascaded down a tech CEO's white Armani suit. Her tray hung useless in her trembling hands. "You incompetent." The CEO's hand shot out, grabbing Maria's wrist hard enough that she gasped. "Do you have any idea what this costs? Are you completely worthless?" The room went silent. 200 faces turned toward the commotion. Maggie was already moving, her heels clicking purposefully across the marble floor. "Let her go." The CEO looked up, recognition flooding his face as he released Maria's wrist like it had burned him. "Mrs. Peters, I didn't, she just..." Maggie knelt beside Maria, gathering shards of glass with her bare hands despite the server's protests. She worked methodically, efficiently, muscle memory from 1,000 shifts she'd once worked taking over. When the worst was cleared, she stood and faced the room. "I was once fired from a waitressing job for spilling coffee on a customer's laptop." Her voice carried without microphones. "I know exactly what it feels like to be treated as disposable. To be called worthless because you made a human mistake while working a job that pays minimum wage and demands perfection." She turned to Maria, whose face was streaked with tears. "If you're interested, my consulting firm is hiring. We need people who work hard even when the job is hard. People who show up. People who deserve to be treated with dignity." She pulled a business card from her clutch. "Call me Monday." Maria's hands shook as she accepted it, her whispered, "Thank you," barely audible. The CEO had already left his table, making a quiet exit while Maggie's attention was elsewhere. An hour later, after the speeches and the auction and the champagne toasts, Henry found Maggie on the restaurant's balcony. She stood at the railing, the city lights spread before her like scattered diamonds. "Do you regret how things went with Richard?" he asked quietly. Maggie shook her head, not turning from the view. "I regret that it had to happen, that someone I trusted turned out to be capable of that much cruelty. But I don't regret standing up for myself. I don't regret making him face consequences." She finally looked at him, and something in her expression had softened since that night 4 months ago. "I used to think strength meant never showing weakness, never letting anyone see you hurt or scared or uncertain. Now I know it means choosing kindness even when you have the power to be cruel. It means helping someone up instead of keeping them down." Henry stepped closer, his hand finding hers. "That's why I fell in love with you. Not because you survived what he did, because of who you chose to become afterward." Through the balcony doors, the gala continued. Maria moved between tables serving champagne, her shoulders straighter now, wearing something that looked like hope. The guests laughed and networked and wrote checks for women entrepreneurs who needed someone to believe in them. And outside, under October stars that mirrored the night 4 months ago, Maggie stood tall, no longer defined by what had been done to her, but by every choice she'd made since. The woman who'd been kicked to the floor had chosen to lift others up. The woman who'd been publicly destroyed had chosen to build something that couldn't be taken away. She wasn't Richard's victim anymore. She wasn't even Richard's survivor. She was simply Maggie. And that was enough. I hope you enjoyed the story. I have a favor to ask. Some of you just watch. I will really appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button. It is free, and this will encourage us to do more.